Well, eventually there will be more students for all of us to handle. As long as Austin is turning away only 1,000 or so a year, those students will be distributed over all the schools of Texas and even outside of Texas. So I wouldn't expect more than just a few hundred to come to Arlington.
I believe that it is unlawful to do work and use county funds and materials and labor and equipment on what is considered private property. There is a decision by the Texas Supreme Court back in 1962 in which this was very definitely spelled out. This is not a case of where a commissioner's equipment is being used while it's not being used on something else. This is a case of where parking lots have actually been paved with a penetrating asphalt and then pea gravel put upon it. This is a service that would cost quite a bit of money, and I do not think it should be done on private property.
We've had killings of police officers. We've had bombings of various sorts. Kent State University has undergone another bombing. We've had buildings burned down. We're having people like the Black Panthers and the Weathermen who seem to want to take over on a guerrilla warfare basis. And it seems to me that it's time that we realize that that if we don't do something about it and do it soon, we're likely to have anarchy, and from that I would say that we can safely predict that we're going into a very repressive state of affairs here in the country.
At this point, we say it is possible through plurality to win elections with 38% of the vote when you have two candidates, as we do for the United States Senate, who represent exactly the same position. We think they're two peas in a pod. We can't see any difference between Mr. Lloyd Bush and Mr. George Benson. They just are exactly the same. Their stance is the same. They fight each other over which one is more conservative. As long as we have this sort of candidacy coming forth into our communities, then we say there's a place for the people, the disenfranchised voters of any state, to have their own type of candidates.
Know that, you know, in just a class sense, there are people who can believe that a fellow has almost an inherent right, you know, to beat up his wife, and it depends on, you know, what perspective do you want to prevail. I think the whole issue of the use of force, we can all conceive of instances, you know, where we would, you know, apply force. I think the ultimate issue is that you want the police, in a very real sense, to respond the way you would. And I suggest that the only way that's going to happen is if you or your surrogate becomes the policeman.
Personally, I say we've had enough, and the defiant, militant factions among us must be made to know that the great middle majority has no more patience for them, and that we will back to the hilt the actions of our enforcement agencies and our courts in slapping them so far back in jail that they will have plenty of time to read the history books and learn that this country was founded to guarantee its citizens protection from terroristic tactics and with protection against these trigger-happy punks who are trying to tear us down.
This complaint is made primarily because we, at the Caruth Rehabilitation Center, which is a special hospital, have seen a lot of cases over the past few years in which policyholders come to us expecting that policy to provide the medical care they need, only to find out that by the policy's definition of a hospital, it will not pay. Consequently, the policyholder or the consumer is stuck with a bill that generally forces them into financial ruin.
I think that for too long we've made believe that the police are purely a ministerial function, which is to say that cops just follow rules. And in my experience, that's just not the case. It's who the policeman is, and, you know, literally in a socioeconomic sense, the perspective that he brings to that job. And I'm not talking about just even a crime situation. It can be even just a family fight. It's his view of the world in terms of what will happen.
We're delighted with the degree of responsiveness to people which this gives us. We're answering 3,000 complaints in our office from ordinary citizens calling in each week. And I think doing broad, long-range planning in the environmental ways, in transportation, in law enforcement, and other things we can do with that much territory.
Has it worked effectively in the past year, then?
Yes, we've had a very good experience. As I compare this year of 1970 with my first year as mayor in 1968, the first was a time of chaos, 58 different departments reporting to me, a lack of responsiveness on the part of government to the ordinary citizen. We have had a larger government, but we now have a more responsive one, and I think this is very meaningful to people.
Well, of course, I haven't kowtowed to Mr. Benson since I've been on the court. I've tried to make him run that place like a business, and I think it has been personally aimed at me, this little vendetta he's got going on, because as late as today, one of the other commissioners told me that yesterday he talked to Mr. Benson and told him why I always help these civic organizations. And Mr. Benson says, oh, that's all right. Skeet's the one that I really want to make look silly. My feeling is that if we have some guidelines, some real strict guidelines that, as has been proposed by the district attorney's office, and if we can follow them without being a hypocrite, then I would go along with it. But I do believe that, for example, when Camp Carter out here, when they call and ask that I help Camp Carter, which has been done every year, and I do it, then I don't want Mr. Benson to have a bunch of criminal investigators jumping out of the bushes and taking my picture, you know.
These lights are even hotter.